Hello, everyone. I'm Fred Wergeles, Webinar Coordinator for the Special Libraries Association Competitive Intelligence Division. Welcome to our webinar, How to Collect and Harness Customer Experience Feedback to Drive Better Insights with Carolyn Galvin. We'd like to thank Aurora WDC for hosting our webinar today. And before we start, I'd like to cover a few things. First, for those of you on the phone, your lines will be muted. And also, please ask questions in the Q&A window on your computer screen, and we will address them at the end of the webinar. The webinar is being recorded, and a slide deck will be provided later on. So thank you for taking the opportunity to catch this presentation live. Please feel free to use social media during and after the webinar. The Twitter hashtag for the webinar is hashtag SLACID, and Carolyn Galvin's Twitter handle is at CM Galvin, G-A-L-V-I-N, CM Galvin. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker. Carolyn is the Director of Industry Insights and responsible for analyzing aggregate data to understand best practices and root cause issues surrounding customer experience and win-loss programs. Utilizing primary source research and secondary information, Carolyn produces syndicated and custom client reports that help to illustrate best practices and benchmarking metrics. Prior to her current role, Carolyn served as the program consultant at Primary Intelligence with direct responsibility for customer experience and win-loss programs. She has nearly 20 years of market research, customer satisfaction, and competitive intelligence experience. And now I'll turn it over to Carolyn.
Thank you, Fred, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. I am really excited to share with you some information on customer experience, including some of our own customer experience research that we've done at Primary Intelligence. For today's discussion, we'll go over the agenda. I'll be sharing information with you about customer experience, which is also referred to as CX. I'll include a definition of customer experience as well as different CX collection methodologies, along with information on how you can turn customer experience data into actionable insights. I'll also be sharing a framework with you that we have developed at Primary Intelligence that surrounds customer experience and revenue specifically. This is something that we call the 4 pillars of customer value, and we'll get into the details of that toward the end of the presentation. We'll leave time for questions and answers at the end, and if we don't get to all of your questions, I will follow up with you individually after today's presentation. I've also included some information at the end of the presentation about Primary Intelligence and our background, as well as some additional resources for customer experience. We won't cover that information specifically, but I will mention it to you now for your future reference. So to start out, what is customer experience analysis? How can we put this concept in a framework to ensure that we're all on the same page when we're discussing customer experience analysis? Customer experience analysis focuses on cumulative, ongoing experiences that our customers have with our organization, whether that's their initial experience with our sales team, their experience of using our product or our service, their experience with our support team, or their experience with the account management team that we've assigned to them on an ongoing basis. And specifically, customer experience analysis is focused on the benefits that our customers are receiving from each and every one of these touch points. The reason that we focus on benefits is that our organization's ability to deliver experiences that are unique from competitors is likely going to increase our customer spending with us and inspire greater loyalty from them in terms of future purchases. So in this picture that you see, we've got a box with different computer parts, a monitor, a keyboard, a CPU. And the point here is that when we go out and we purchase a computer or any product, we're not buying the product for the product's sake. We're not buying it so we have a monitor. Rather, we're buying a product or a service so that we can get utility and benefit out of it. It might mean writing the next great American novel or connecting online with colleagues or family or friends. It's the benefit that we're receiving from the products and services that we're purchasing. The primary goal of most customer experience programs is not only to retain existing customers, but also to grow our business with them through cross-sell or upsell opportunities. And this is important for obvious reasons in terms of growing our business and growing our share of the market. Quantitatively, though, it's also very important because studies have shown that it costs between 4 and 10 times more to acquire a new customer than it does to preserve and grow an existing one. Now, some people believe it costs up to 30 times more to acquire a new customer than it does to keep an existing one. But whatever the number is, we definitely want to focus on growing our existing customer base. Being able to highlight the value that we're delivering to our customers is really, really critical. And when we talk about value, we're talking about an alignment between expected benefits, expected solution performance, and expected support experience with those actual benefits or actual solution performance or actual support experience. So we're looking at alignment between expectations and what's actually being delivered. When there's not an alignment between expectations and reality, then we tend to see a decrease in customers' perception of the value that they're getting from our solution. We also know that the more effort that our customers need to put into realizing the value from our solution and from working with our organization, the lower the likelihood of renewal. So when there are clear benefits from our solution and very little effort on the part of the customer to realize those benefits, that's when we start to see renewal rates that are typically very, very high. So we'll now talk about some collection methodologies, the next portion of the presentation. And when we talk about collection methodologies, there are lots of different ways that we can collect information, everything from online collection to going on site to the customer's institution and so forth. And I thought it would be helpful in terms of framing out this portion of the discussion to put together a table with all of the different collection methodologies and then some advantages and disadvantages of each. And I'll go through these briefly in terms of the different methodologies and pros and cons. The first methodology that I would outline here are online surveys. And if you've ever done an online survey, you know that they are incredibly efficient. You can reach a large number of people very quickly with those online surveys. The downside, one of the downsides though, is that there's no ability to ask any sort of follow-up question, any sort of probing, any sort of clarification. And when we have online surveys that have maybe an open text box for the response or optional text boxes after a quantitative question, sometimes we see that the responses can be very confusing or even contradictory in terms of earlier information that was provided by the respondent. So being able to go back and clarify that information is very, very difficult in an online survey. It can also be very expensive to purchase names if you don't have a list of people that you've already collected and you need to go out and purchase names. That can be expensive. Now there are some tools, some plugins to social media such as Capture, that's a plugin to LinkedIn that will provide you with a list of email addresses. The neat thing about Capture is that it provides information about not just the current corporate or professional email, but also social emails or personal emails or previous emails that can be very, very helpful as well. In terms of on-site visits, a second methodology, one of the great advantages here is that it really shows our customers that we care about them and that we're paying attention to their organization. When we send executives, senior executives out to meet with our customers, it tells our customers that those executives aren't hiding behind a mid-level manager, they're not hiding behind a computer screen or a telephone. So that can be very, very helpful. Downsides, though, are that many times those conversations and on-site visits are not recorded. So being able to capture and analyze information for later reflection or later comparison with other customer data may be very spotty, very minimal, or non-existent altogether. And if you've ever worked with an executive, you know that many times they're not going to be taking a whole lot of notes. So it's hard to find some real deep information there in terms of any sort of conversation or follow-up. Another potential disadvantage for on-site visits is that the individual or the team that's sent to meet with the customer may not be the best group to meet with them. An example here, if you're sending a member from the customer's account team, they may be very defensive if they hear negative feedback or any sort of suggestions for improvement that they might make. And so we see here many times that customers may be less than candid in terms of sharing the completeness or the totality of their feedback. And of course, on-site visits tend to be very pricey due to travel costs and being out of the office for an extended period of time. With phone interviews, we do have the ability here to ask probing follow-up questions. So in the work that we do at Primary Intelligence, we do use a combination of phone interviews and online surveys for most of our research, and we can really get into some root cause issues and identify some root problems with those probing questions. So that's definitely an advantage. They can also be recorded, and we do record all of our conversations at Primary Intelligence. I would say that 99.999% of the time people are okay with recorded conversations. In fact, they even expect to be recorded in any sort of professional conversation that they're having today. In terms of disadvantages, one of the disadvantages would be scheduling logistics. So needing to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning or having to have a call with someone at 8 o'clock at night if there are differences in time zones. And I know that that's certainly happened in the work that I've done and that we've done at Primary Intelligence, but it's just something that we need to do in our line of work. The other thing that I would say in terms of a disadvantage for phone interviews is that it's really hard to gauge the other person's body language. You don't see the other person, and so you don't see their facial expressions or their body language. And in some cultures where people speak very slowly, where silence is valued, it's difficult to tell if the person has paused because they're finished with the question, finished answering the question, or if they've paused because they're collecting their thoughts and they simply want to pause and then they're going to add some more to their response. So that can be a little bit challenging in terms of phone interviews. In terms of social media shares many of the same advantages and disadvantages as online surveys. It's very efficient, has very broad reach, especially in business to consumer marketing, but very hard to ask those follow-up questions for more information or clarify the feedback. Websites are another type of collection methodology that we're starting to see, especially with customer experience feedback. And this is a great way of taking advantage of visitors to the website or customers coming to your website. There's a great example of a customer experience survey for current customers on Concur's website, C-O-N-C-U-R. If you go to concur.com and you go to menu in the upper right-hand corner and then about Concur and customer experience, you'll get to their customer experience online interview. So this, again, very efficient and it's got some good reach. The downsides, of course, there's no ability to ask any sort of follow-up questions. Responses might be confusing if you have open-ended questions or open-ended opportunities for feedback. And in some website interviews, it can be very difficult to find them. They can be buried several layers deep on the website depending on the real estate competition with different groups. So it might be difficult for customers to find those actual surveys. And then the final methodology that I'll talk about is industry associations. These can be a great way to reach large groups of experts very quickly and very uniformly. The Customer Experience Professionals Association, CXPA, is one of the best known industry associations for customer experience information. They've got best practices, events, certification, testing, so really good resource to reach a lot of experts very quickly. The downside, though, in terms of industry associations is that they're often very top-heavy with vendors as opposed to practitioners, and there are frequently some concerns that are raised about self-promotion of specific brands or processes or concepts amongst the vendors. So just something to kind of be aware of if you do go out to industry associations for methodology and collection. At Primary Intelligence, we do use a combination of most of these different outreach methodologies. The one that we probably use the least is the on-site visits, although we certainly will do that if our clients ask us to. But there is certainly a cost and time associated with an on-site visit. We do use online surveys that we send out to respondents initially, and then we'll follow up with a telephone interview for all of our program interviews, so our win-loss and our customer experience program interviews. However, we do use social media quite a bit in terms of going out for industry research. So we've got a state of customer experience research project that's going to be starting actually at the end of this week, and we will rely very heavily on social media for outreach to take that survey. So good idea to use a combination of different methodologies for outreach to really make sure you've got coverage of the market in different ways, different channels. We'll now move on to the next topic of our discussion, which is how we turn customer experience data into actionable intelligence. So we've just gone out, we've collected all of this great information, and now what do we do with it? One of the things that we hear from our clients on a pretty frequent basis is that it's very, very difficult for them to turn the data that they collect from a customer experience program or from customer experience outreach into actionable insights. They'll go through a tremendous amount of time, effort, money. We'll help them, again, time, effort, money on our part to collect the information, but then it tends to sit on a shelf or in a computer file, and business goes on as usual. And this is very, very frustrating to many, many people, particularly the customers that we asked to provide the feedback. So I wanted to share with you some steps that you can take to ensure that the customer experience data is actionable, that it will actually be used and not just sit on a shelf somewhere. So the first suggestion here is to really make sure that you've got buy-in from your C-suite for the customer experience program. At many organizations, I think increasingly we're seeing that senior executives do see the value of customer experience programs. They see the value of collecting, analyzing, and taking action on customer feedback. But I can tell you from my direct research and talking with people in the industry that this is not a universal perception, if you will. There are some organizations where senior executives don't view CX programs as a long-term investment, especially if they're not bringing targeted return on investment within a set period of time. And usually that period of time is 1 to 2 years at the most. So it's very important to get long-term commitment and to have that buy-in from the C-level to ensure that the program is going to be successful and that there's enough time to really get the information, bring it back in, analyze it, and then be able to act on it. Reporting to the CEO directly so that whoever's in charge of the CX program, having that individual report to the CEO, or at a minimum, having a senior leader to call upon to act as an advocate can be very, very effective and can be a best practice. At the same time, really building relationships across the organization with other departments, other lines of business is very helpful in terms of building alliances, momentum for the program, and making sure that people are really bought into the concept of customer experience and customer feedback. The second recommendation here in terms of turning the data into insights is identifying key stakeholders and their priorities for the customer experience data. So the types of questions that we would want to ask here are, who is going to be using this information? Who are my stakeholders, and for what are they going to be using it? What is our organization's maturity level with regard to customer experience, and what's the current cultural temperament of our firm? Developing a customer-focused culture really is a long and I would say very difficult task. It's long and hard because it involves changes in the way that people do their work and their work routines and their outlooks and how they process requests and things like that. So laying the groundwork for implementing a very customer-focused culture through different principles, strategies that employees can rally around can really help people to better understand how they're fitting into the bigger picture, and that really helps them to see the larger picture. The third recommendation here is to deliver a steady diet of data that's parsed into bite-sized pieces, really making sure that you're staying top of mind with internal constituents and internal stakeholders through steady contact with them, and giving them information that's in manageable quantities. I can tell you that as a researcher, I have certainly been guilty of giving just voluminous information to people, not because I was trying to overwhelm them, but because I was so excited about the information and I was sure that they were going to be equally excited as well and that they couldn't wait to dive into it. But they're busy people that we're working with and for, and we have this tendency to overload them sometimes. So as a result, oftentimes they don't read any of it or they don't read much of it. And so bite-sized pieces really help to avoid this. I have really tried to take the mentality of a news reporter, where I'm highlighting the most interesting findings and then I'm providing more information as necessary. So really trying to keep that information relevant in manageable pieces and trying to make sure that I'm giving them the must-haves and not all of the nice-to-haves on the first go-round. Using dashboards, if they're available, that update key metrics that you're tracking, as well as analytics to highlight the most interesting findings and comparisons, can also be really, really helpful in terms of moving to actionable insights. At Primary Intelligence, we have analytical tools through our software that allow our clients to see very high-level information as well as very detailed information, and we do that by applying different filters or widgets to the information. So it's very helpful for different audiences. If you want to produce a high-level summary for your senior leadership, you can do that. If you're looking for very detailed reports where they're looking for the nitty-gritty detailed information for mid-level managers or individual contributors, you can have that as well. But really trying to telescope in and out through dashboards and analytics can be very, very helpful. And whether you're trying to do customer experience internally on your own, or if you're using an external provider, whoever that company might be, really trying to use those technologies and the tools to help you to do the telescoping in and out can save you a lot of time and a lot of frustration. I know we also have the ability to do keyword searches, and so certainly if you're getting a lot of qualitative information back, if you're doing telephone interviews and you have a lot of qualitative information, it's really hard to get through all of the words, the hundreds of pages of reports to filter out what's most important, and certainly technology can help you to cut through that very quickly. Finally, organizing, attending, hosting discovery sessions to understand root cause and best practices is really a good way to move the organization forward in terms of customer experience and really getting to those actionable insights. Root cause issues are those that are causing you to lose customers and lose revenue. Best practices are areas where you need to replicate throughout your organization to really retain customers or grow revenue, increase loyalty. And discovery sessions are just that. There are sessions where you're bringing together individuals who are relevant to that particular account. So you've just gotten feedback from an organization that is your customer, and you want to discuss the customer's feedback. Many times clients will say to me, well, who should I invite to my discovery session from my internal team? Who's relevant to be there? And the response to that really is, it depends. Certainly you want to have your account team there, the individuals who are responsible for managing that account on a day-to-day basis. They need to always be there. But the other individuals that you invite to the discovery sessions will be dependent on the customer's responses. So for example, if they mentioned that they're having issues with service and support, you would want to invite individuals from that organization. Or if they're having issues with certain product configurations or features and functionality, you would want to have somebody from the product team in the session as well. So whoever the customer mentions in the discovery session as being particularly problematic or particularly delightful, that's who you'd want to have on those calls. The other thing I would mention about discovery sessions is that we have had some clients that have said to us, you know, why do I need to come to a discovery session? I can read the report that you produce for us, Primary Intelligence, and you know, I don't need to have you read it to me, and I certainly don't need to, you know, be in a reading session with a bunch of other people. I'm busy, and that's certainly true. Everyone on the team can read those reports and should read those reports. But what the discovery sessions do is they bring people together, either physically in a single room or virtually over the phone, and they allow people to see a bigger picture. They allow people to connect the dots so that if a customer says, I'm having these issues with support, then the account team or maybe somebody in the support organization might say, well, yeah, we're having these ongoing issues. It's a systemic problem. We're seeing consistent feedback along these certain types of issues. So it really gives you the ability to see the bigger picture, to connect those dots, and also importantly to assign action items and follow-up. This again is where you get movement from the feedback, and you're not just saying, okay, that's nice to have feedback and then not making any changes, but you assign follow-up and action items to people. If you've got a tool that allows you to do that, all the better, but you know, you make sure that you give those action items to the relevant individuals. We'll now look at CX findings and driving revenue, and this is the part of the presentation that I wanted to talk with you about in terms of the framework that we've developed at Primary Intelligence for CX and customer value in terms of focusing on revenue. Ultimately, the goal of most organizations is to make money, right? We want to make sure we're staying profitable, we can stay in business to continue to serve the needs of our customers. We've developed a methodology for understanding customer experience within the framework of revenue capture. And so this four pillars of customer value talks about different ways to think about revenue capture with regard to customer experience. And we'll walk through each one of these today, and I'll give you some examples of each one as well. So got a kind of a schematic here, and we'll talk about these four pillars, but they are customer retention, revenue leakage is the second one, revenue retention, and revenue expansion. And they each associate with one of the pillars there in the diagram. So like I said, we'll dive into each one of these. I'll give you some examples and some additional explanation, and we can talk about these. So the first pillar is customer retention, and customer retention, as you might know, is our ability to hold on to our existing customers. It basically answers the question, am I going to survive, or are we going to survive a contract renewal? Are our customers going to stay with us? If we're losing customers, we're obviously doing something wrong. If we're successfully renewing our customers, we want to make sure that we're leveraging best practices throughout the organization to continue to hold on to those customers. We have seen research by John Fleming and Jim Asplund, and their research indicates that engaged customers generate 1.7 times, so almost 2 times more revenue than passive customers. Again, engaged customers, much more revenue generation than passive customers, almost 2 times more. And this really highlights a direct link between customer retention and profitability. If you talk to customer experience experts, many people will tell you that customer retention is more than just meeting customer expectations, right? We can't just meet expectations, we've got to really exceed their expectations in order to retain customers. Customer retention is really important. I mean, obviously we want to keep our customers because we want them to continue being paying customers for us. And we also know, as we talked about earlier, that it costs more to acquire new customers than to retain existing customers. I wanted to, though, to also share some research findings that we just determined through some industry research on business-to-business buyer loyalty at Primary Intelligence. So we asked more than 10,000 B2B buyers how likely they would be to recommend each of the vendors that they considered. And in the research, we found that 70% of the time they were more willing to recommend the winning vendor. So that's not too surprising. If they're choosing the vendor that they selected or thinking about the vendor that they selected, there's 70% of the time they're more willing to recommend that winning vendor. But what's even more surprising is when we asked those buyers how likely they would be to consider each vendor for future business, the winning vendors were only more likely to be considered 45% of the time. When we looked at winners and losers combined, they were likely to be considered 46% of the time, so just 1% more. What does that mean? Well, in a nutshell, your product might have won the day. You might have won an opportunity based on the product functionality and the product superiority of your product compared to a competitor. But you still have to retain that customer. You still need to make sure that they've got a positive experience with you, that you're servicing them correctly, or you could risk losing them to the competition over the long term. So really important to have an ongoing dialogue, ongoing feedback with those customers, and make sure that you're retaining them over the long term. It's important to note that most customer experience programs stop here. They're simply looking at customer retention. But we'll now talk about the second pillar, the second of our 4 pillars, to talk about some other areas of customer experience and revenue and profitability. The second pillar is revenue leakage. And when we consider this pillar, and this pillar is really showing water coming out of this pillar, water and money coming out of the pillar. But when we consider revenue leakage, we can use an analogy to a leaking bucket. So in this analogy, the business is the bucket and the customers are water in the bucket. And so when we have leakage, we have customers coming out of our business. And to fix revenue leakage, there are typically 3 options that we might consider. One is that we can plug the leaks or fix those problems that are causing our customers to leave us. A second option is to add more water, so we could acquire new customers. Even though we might be losing some, we're still acquiring enough that we're not going under. Or a third option, we can get a new bucket altogether. So we can walk away from our leaking business and we can invest in a new one. Now, some people would say that revenue leakage is controllable, and some people believe that it's uncontrollable. So it's controllable because as organizations, we can fix those issues that are driving our customers away. Maybe we have uncompetitive pricing or our support is lacking. On the other hand, leakage may be uncontrollable because there could be some changing customer preferences in terms of what they're looking for in a solution, or possibly some unforeseen events within the customer's organization, such as a merger or an acquisition. So things that are outside of our control. But one example that helps to really kind of frame this whole concept of customer leakage is an example. And in the example that I'll share with you, this is actually a real world example. there's a customer who signed a contract for $100,000 but only used $50,000 in services against the contract. So the result was a 50% reduction in the amount that could be invoiced to that customer. The lower contract usage may have been due to any number of reasons, right? I mean, we talked about possibly mergers or acquisitions or new leadership that challenges the vendor or the solution that was selected, or difficulty engaging stakeholders. So it could be due to a number of different reasons. Revenue leakage, though, is important because we really see it as a silent killer in terms of sales goals. So when a company is only realizing $50,000 of revenue on a $100,000 contract, the notion here is that they could have earned another $100,000 during the time that it took them to fulfill the remainder of the earlier contract. And for services organizations in particular, their margin is very, very much hurt by the increased expenses of taking twice as long to deliver. Another reason that revenue leakage is a silent killer, if you will, is that it throws off other internal planning and metrics. So if we're only able to bill $50,000 in the scenario that we just described, we've also paid sales commission on $100,000 and we've allocated resources based on $100,000 in terms of the contract we were expecting. So that's a problem. And now we also have to book another deal to reach the revenue goals. So, significant problems when we think about revenue leakage and how much our customers are actually spending against what they contracted for in the initial agreement. The third pillar of customer value focuses on revenue retention. And in this pillar, we address whether or not we're retaining the same amount of customer spend from our customers this year as we did last year. So in other words, assuming that we made it through the customer retention hurdle and our customers did decide to renew with us, will those customers spend as much on our products and our services this year as they did last year? Now, revenue retention does not take into consideration the actual number of customers retained. It's only focused on the amount of revenue that's retained. So, for example, if we're able to upsell or cross-sell or charge more for our products, we actually could have lost customers, but we still would have had higher revenue retention this year than we did last year. Conversely, we could retain all of our old customers with 100% customer renewal, but we could still lose revenue due to discounting or refunds or the reduction in the use of our solutions by customers. Most companies are looking for revenue retention rates of at least 100%, if not a little bit more or a lot more, depending on very high growth startup types of industries. But 100% would indicate year-over-year revenue growth. Revenue retention is important because if our customers are reducing how much they're spending with us every year, we then would need to replace that revenue with another customer or with growth in another account, both of which are very expensive activities, as we've talked about. Low numbers in revenue retention also point to potentially larger issues with our products or with customer experience. So we firmly believe that companies will always spend money on products and services that deliver value to them, that they deem to be valuable. Even if the customer is assuring you that their experience has been great, so you do a customer experience interview and they say, yeah, everything's fine, everything's great. If they're spending less with you, then you're having issues of revenue retention. And in that way, they're telling you the true value of their experience with you through their wallets. The fourth and final area that we'll look at in terms of these four pillars of customer value is revenue expansion. And here, if we use another analogy, a building analogy, we essentially would like to see or determine how we can help our customers add another room onto their existing building or even add a new structure entirely. And so for most firms, revenue expansion relates to cross-selling or upselling their products or their services that the customer may not currently be using. It's typically very high margin revenue because there are usually only negligible increases in the costs of servicing existing customers. It's important to look at and consider revenue expansion because when we track revenue expansion, we're tracking the effectiveness of our business development efforts. We're also tracking how well our solution portfolio matches the needs of our customers. So if our customers see value in the first solution that we sold to them, but they are unwilling to expand into other products that we're selling to them or trying to sell to them, there may be some misalignment there in terms of our customer needs. So increasing revenue expansion also increases the stickiness that we have with our customers. The more products, the more services that customers use, the more likely we are to become truly embedded in their organization and really be seen as a trusted provider and possibly even a trusted partner to that organization. That concludes my presentation. I know I've given you a lot of information to think about, and you may have some questions in terms of the different concepts that I've shared or maybe some other areas that we haven't talked about today. I'd now like to turn the call back over to Fred to see if there have been any questions that have come in based upon my presentation today. And I did include my contact information here in case we don't get to all of the questions, or if you think of a question at some future point and would like to reach out at that point to ask the question.
Thank you, Carolyn. It was very interesting. I'm looking now. There haven't been any posted yet, but I have one, and I was wondering if you could give what your opinion is on some of the open source tools to measure the sentiment from social media and how useful or valuable that those are in the bigger picture of customer experience.
Yeah, I think those tools are definitely very valuable in more of the B2C space, where we see more movement and more activity in terms of the social channels. So for your members who operate in the business to consumer marketing, they can be incredibly useful. I mean, a lot of times people will talk about social media as really an ongoing online focus group, right? It's the ability to hear real time what people are saying in a kind of a virtual focus group setting. And so I think that they can be very, very valuable to get that feedback in terms of those settings. In the business to business world, which is where we operate at Primary Intelligence, they're less helpful simply because they're used less often. We tend to see people gathering more at conferences or industry events, or maybe a local event with a local chamber of commerce or a local industry association, where that's where they're sharing that type of feedback, either recommendations or their propensity to do future business with a firm. So I think in business to business, they're used less often, which is not to say that they're not valuable when they are used. Certainly if you're seeing comments on a support site as a form of social media or online feedback, that would certainly be very valuable, but we tend to see less of that in B2B.
Mm-hmm. We've got another question. What are some of the analytical tools that your company uses?
Yeah, so we have our own internal tools that we have developed at Primary Intelligence. It's software, it's called True Voice software, and the reason for the name True Voice is because we strongly believe that hearing from the voice of buyers is, we don't want to say the only voice that matters, but it's probably the most important voice that matters. We want to hear from buyers directly. And so we have developed two primary tools. One is it's called Profiler. So for every interview that we do with a buyer, and we do literally thousands of interviews every year, we will have a profile, and the profiles are about 10 to 15 pages in length, and we have both quantitative and qualitative feedback in each of the profiles that talks about what was most important to them in terms of their experience with the vendor, what the support issues, communication issues, things like that. And the profiles are all available on a portal, so anybody in the company from any location in the world could see the profiles. That gives our customers the ability to really dive in deep to very discrete information. So if they want to see those verbatim comments, specific issues that a specific account is having, they can really telescope in and do that deep dive. But then we also have an analytics tool that looks across different profiles in a specific program. So maybe we've done 20 interviews, or maybe we've done 50 or 100, whatever that number is for each of our clients, and we continue, of course, to add to the number of profiles that we do. But we can look across those different profiles, across those different interviews, and we can see, okay, for this particular client, these are the areas where they're doing well. Their support is superior. They're doing a great job in terms of features and functionality that the client's looking for, or their customers are looking for. But guess what? They have some problems with communication, and so we can look at gaps in a customer expectations versus where the client is, and we can really telescope out there to see what are some areas that are being done well, and what are some areas that are not being done so well, what areas for improvement in the future. So we have developed these tools internally. We have a product management team and developers working around the world to constantly update the tools. And one of the reasons that we decided to do our own internal development is that we've been in business for 15 years, and 15 years ago when we started to do customer experience and win-loss analysis, we weren't really finding the tools that we thought were important and the methodologies and the analytics that were important to include, and we decided to invest in it ourselves to come up with these tools. And we constantly get from our customers, I mean, we drink our own Kool-Aid, if you will. We're always doing customer feedback interviews and always trying to see where we can make the tools better. So we think our tools are very good and allow people to telescope in and out in terms of those findings in the analytics.
Okay, thank you very much. I wanted to remind any of our listeners to add any questions on your computer screen, and we'll relay those on. Let me just check.
Fred, the other thing I would just add about our tools, if anyone on the call today or listening to the recorded session is interested in seeing the tools, we have developed a demo company called Tenscon, and so we have the ability to show people the tools if you're interested in seeing them and looking at them, and it wouldn't be looking at a client's data, it would be looking at demo data, but it's very comparable to client data and what a client would see. So I would be happy to facilitate a demonstration or provide a demonstration if you're interested in seeing the types of tools that we provide. Even just, if you're doing your own internal CX program today and kind of getting ideas for your program or just comparing what might be out there, happy to share that information with you if you're interested.
Okay, great, thanks. Let me see if there's any others. No, just that one question. Well, let me thank you again, Carolyn, for your time and for your insights. And I also want to thank again Aurora WDC for sponsoring the webinar. Be sure to check out our next webinar, which is on April 7th, when Laura Bray will provide a preview of the 2016 Competitive Intelligence Division presentations at the annual conference and a preview of the overall 2016 conference. I want to thank everybody for attending, and again, thank you, Aurora, for hosting. And with that, we'll close out the webinar. Thank you again.